Just starting out in life, but already in the red. Born in a Britain burdened with £1 trillion of national debt. A country where university fees are soaring, so too healthcare costs, but pension pots are running dry. On the streets, violence from people who feel cheated. But what about those too young to protest? How will they respond when the time comes for them to pay our bills? Is it destined to end in tears?
Every day, everybody in the country is more in debt, and every day the future generation has got more and more of a problem to deal with.
We spend money on ourselves, we keep electing politicians and governments to spend money on us, and the bill is sent elsewhere.
Is this really about a nation adjusting to the fact that it's going to be poorer in future than it had anticipated?
Both sides of this generational imbalance know that something's going wrong.
The younger generation are not going to be willing to pay their taxes to sustain us, the baby boomers, in our old age.
Riots that we've seen in the past couple of years and the protests and the demonstrations, I think are only going to get far worse.
The bomb will go off with this generation.
When Disraeli coined the phrase two nations, he was highlighting a huge disparity in wealth between rich and poor in 19th century Britain. Today, a new but very different kind of divide has opened up. It's between a generation preparing to retire, the baby boomers, who pass on a state groaning with debt, and those just starting out in life have been handed a vast pile of bills from an outrageous spending spree enjoyed by someone else. For them, it must feel like being born bankrupt. Remember the new millennium, a time when house prices and stock markets rocketed. With a flash of easy money came a suspension of disbelief. A spend now, pay later binge that left Britain's balance sheet in tatters.
I must admit, I look back to around the year 2000 and think, how on earth did we build up an economy that was so absolutely fundamentally based on debt?
When we look back over the last 12 to 15 years, will we conclude that what we thought was a boom was in fact just an accumulation of debt, borrowing from the future to spend today?
Yes, I believe that a large part of the growth we thought we had over the past few years was an illusion. It was based on borrowed money. That borrowed money has either been lost or will have to be repaid. And we have been kidding ourselves that we were richer than we were. We've had a government that has been pretending that it can afford all kinds of giveaways to the population, but the money isn't there to pay for it.
The nation went on a wild shopping spree, funded largely by credit. Now household debts have hit £1.5 trillion and are still going up. Our governments did much the same. Between the years 2000 and 2010, state spending increased in real terms, inflation adjusted, from £450 billion to nearly £700 billion. Under Gordon Brown, prudence morphed into profligacy. How did we get where we are today? Why is government expenditure, in real terms, inflation adjusted, 50% more than it was 10 years ago? Where did all the money go?
Well, we've got used to living beyond our means, Jeff. That's what we've done. We keep voting for more and more of this. And you know what the great trick is? We send the bill to someone else. That's the great trick of it all. We spend money on ourselves, we keep electing politicians and governments to spend money on us, and the bill is sent elsewhere.
It's almost intergenerational theft, isn't it?
It is intergenerational theft. There is no doubt about it. And I would say, Jeff, that if you are worried at all, if you have one iota of concern about the environment and climate change and the sort of planet that we're going to leave to our children, if you've got even the most modicum of concern about it, you should be apoplectic about the level of debt we're leaving them. It is outrageous, it is immoral, we have lived well beyond our means, and our conclusion ultimately is to send our children, grandchildren, and the unconceived the bill for that.
In March this year, the UK's state debt topped £1 trillion. The scale of this is staggering. Simply keeping track of all those noughts, it's no easy task. Let's take a pack of £20 notes. This is 2,000 quid. Doesn't look like much. It's more than the average worker's monthly take-home pay. If I lined up £20 notes side by side, the length of this taxi and a bit more would be £1 million, about the average worker's lifetime earnings pre-tax. Now that's serious money. But if you lined up £1 trillion in 20s, it would stretch beyond Paris, Rome, past Greece, over Saudi Arabia, and end up in Dubai. And it gets worse, because UK's state debt is forecast to hit £1.4 trillion by 2016. That line would go all the way to Bangkok. Paying the interest on all that debt is costing us £46 billion a year, £7 billion more than we're spending on defence. For a first-hand look at the born bankrupts generation, I've come to the University Hospital in Nottingham. The maternity unit is a busy one, where proud mothers are preparing to take home new arrivals. Are you optimistic for your daughter's future?
Yes.
Why not? Exactly so.
Yeah. Looking forward what they're going to do when they grow up, looking after us, we looking after them.
The trouble is, there are now so many more of us for them to look after. I'm part of the post-war baby boom. At least 17 million of us were delivered between 1945 and 1965, creating a demographic time bomb because we're living far longer than anyone expected. With current birth rates flat, today's babies will have to prop up an inverse pyramid of financial obligations. Each of them starts out £17,000 in the red, their share of today's national debt, and their bill for looking after previous generations will keep on rising.
I think we've probably seen the last generation who have never had it so good, if you like, and the next generation is going to have less and less to spend, not least because the current generation and the ones just before it have spent a lot of money on their behalf.
I think it was Burke who said that society is a contract, a partnership between the living and those not yet born. Yeah. Has that contract been broken?
I think to a large extent it has. To some extent we've bankrupted the next generation by spending their money, but we've also almost emotionally bankrupted ourselves and ethically bankrupted ourselves in the process. If someone came to your door and said they had taken out a credit card in your child's name and they had run up a very large bill on that credit card and they weren't prepared to pay it, they'd keep the goods but your child had to pay for it in the future, you wouldn't be very happy. That person would probably be locked up and put in jail.
You'd be absolutely furious.
You would be furious. And yet that's exactly what we have done to everyone being born today and will continue to be born.
The baby boomer generation, and that's my generation and perhaps yours as well, Jeff.
I'm afraid it is.
Born between 1945 and 1965. We've ended up with most of our nation's wealth. We've ended up with a lot of political power. Or have we essentially used it selfishly for our own purposes? I don't think we're an inherently bad generation, but I think we have ended up where the younger generation are going to be very lucky if they end up with the same kind of advantages that we've had.
There's little chance of that. Today's generation of newborn babies will almost certainly have to be more self-reliant than their predecessors. The journey from the maternity ward to the main university campus is just a short walk across this bridge. But for the babies born in that hospital today, hoping to make that journey in 20 years' time, well, it's going to be a costly experience. Nottingham is part of the Russell Group, Britain's elite universities. Last year, it attracted more applications than any of its rivals. Coming to this great university changed my life in an immeasurably positive way. To be frank, I couldn't believe my luck. Not only did I not have to pay tuition fees, but my local authority paid me. Yes, I received a grant of £900 a year for the pleasure of studying here. For today's students, it's very different. Those entering university will be charged up to £9,000 a year in fees, graduating on average with debts of £53,400. Paying that off is expected to take up to 30 years. Between them, these Nottingham students already have borrowings of nearly £100,000. They see the high costs as part of the university experience.
I was coming from the mindset that going to university for me wasn't really a choice, it was just what I was going to do. For anything I wanted to do in life, that's what I needed to do to get there, and it was just accepted that debt came with that.
Isn't there going to come a time when you emerge from this bubble and you're going to look at the position you're in and say, hang on a minute, what happened? The last lot had it all. They nicked my future. Yeah. I am furious. Or will you just take it on the chin and pay your taxes and be poor?
In a depressing way, the kind of riots that we've seen in the past couple of years and the protests and the demonstrations, I think they're only going to continue and they're only going to get far worse in the coming years, really.
So, more grievance over the costs, but what about the benefits? Is the value of a degree holding up?
If you have more and more people going to university, the extra value of going to university declines because the supply of university graduates has increased.
Whether you've been to Oxford or the University of Coketown, you're going to come out with the same kind of debts. But the kids at the bottom, I feel that they've had a fraud perpetrated on them, largely because they come from disadvantaged families and they are unknowing.
I think there is definitely that risk, you know, that people will not realise they shouldn't be spending those £30,000–35,000 on an education because they're not going to get good value for it.
After the break, how will the born bankrupt generation afford to buy homes? And when will they be able to retire? Or will they have to keep on working well into old age?